The courtroom was silent, almost reverent, as the session began. The tension was palpable. Everyone present knew this was not a typical hearing. At the center of the room, Jasmine Crockett adjusted her notes calmly, exuding a sense of controlled authority. Across the aisle, Ivanka Trump sat poised, her posture impeccable, exuding confidence and the quiet assurance of someone used to commanding attention. Observers whispered among themselves, wondering how this confrontation would unfold. It wasn't merely a clash of opinions. It was a battle of ideologies and political strategies, set against the backdrop of a meticulously formal courtroom. The judge's gavel came down sharply. "We are here to address the matters presented. Each side will present their arguments. Let us proceed with decorum," the judge intoned. With a measured nod, Crockett began, her voice firm but calm, resonating through the courtroom. "Your Honor, ladies and gentlemen," Crockett began, "the issues at hand are not matters of personal preference. They concern the principles of accountability, transparency, and the rule of law. It is critical that public figures, irrespective of their status or influence, adhere to the standards expected of them. When those standards are compromised, it is not merely a political failing. It is a breach of public trust." Ivanka Trump's expression remained neutral, but there was a subtle tension in her jawline. When she finally spoke, her tone was measured, almost rehearsed, the kind of calm that comes from years in the public eye. "I respect Congresswoman Crockett's dedication to her perspective," she said, "but it is also crucial to understand that policy decisions, public statements, and strategic initiatives are nuanced. Oversimplification leads to misinterpretation, and that is exactly what I believe has occurred here." Crockett's eyes narrowed slightly, a flicker of challenge crossing her gaze. She was quick to respond, her words precise, deliberately structured. "Oversimplification is not the concern here, Ms. Trump. The matter is whether those in positions of influence are acting in good faith. It is not about perspective, it is about documented facts, actions, and the tangible impact on communities that depend on accountability from leadership." The courtroom murmured. Reporters scribbled furiously. The atmosphere was charged. The clash was no longer theoretical. It was visceral. Ivanka leaned forward slightly, her voice now a fraction sharper. "Congresswoman, with all due respect, your argument presumes intention where there may be none. Policies and initiatives are often complex. Decisions are made with multiple variables, many of which are not publicly visible. To judge them solely on visible outcomes risks mischaracterization." Crockett's rebuttal was immediate, incisive, and delivered with an energy that seemed to electrify the courtroom. "Your Honor," she said, addressing the judge while keeping her eyes on Ivanka, "intent cannot negate responsibility. When millions of Americans are affected by decisions, it is insufficient to hide behind complexity. Leadership is accountable for both intent and outcome, and history will not absolve negligence masked as complexity." At that moment, the tension spiked. Ivanka opened her mouth to speak, but was interrupted unintentionally by the judge reminding both sides to address each point methodically. The judge's intervention briefly subdued the rising tempers, but the spark had already been lit. Once order was restored, Ivanka attempted a more controlled approach, invoking her experience in business and advocacy. "I have consistently worked on initiatives designed to empower communities, improve economic outcomes, and support families," she explained. "I recognize that outcomes are imperfect, but the effort, the strategy, and the intention are undeniable. Oversight and improvement are part of any system, and it is precisely this framework that should be emphasized rather than interpreted as failure." Crockett leaned forward, voice firm and unwavering. "Effort is commendable, Ms. Trump, but effort alone does not satisfy the public's expectation of accountability. Actions must be transparent and outcomes measurable. When policies disproportionately harm vulnerable populations, when programs fail to deliver promised support, the public is entitled to more than explanations. They are entitled to accountability. The courtroom fell silent for a moment, as though everyone was collectively holding their breath. Even seasoned reporters were caught off guard by the directness of Crockett's challenge. Ivanka's calm demeanor faltered for a second, a blink too quick to be noticed by the casual observer, but noticeable to the trained eye. She had encountered criticism before, certainly, but the precision and unflinching nature of Crockett's argument demanded more than a polished response. It demanded engagement, and that engagement was immediate. Ivanka cleared her throat and spoke, her tone now carrying a subtle note of insistence. Congresswoman, your focus on outcomes is valid, yet it ignores the broader context. Policies do not exist in isolation. Economic, social, and political factors all intersect to shape results. To attribute failure solely to those leading initiatives is an oversimplification that does not serve the public interest. Crockett's reply was sharp, yet meticulously professional. Acknowledging context is important, Ms. Trump, but context does not absolve responsibility. Leaders are expected to navigate complexity effectively. Failure to do so, whether through oversight or negligence, has real consequences for the people these policies affect. It is not a matter of opinion, it is a matter of accountability, and it must be recognized openly, without deflection or rationalization. At this point, the courtroom felt like a taut wire about to snap. The exchange had escalated beyond polite debate into a confrontation of principles and philosophies. Ivanka's composure remained intact, but her responses were now shorter, more deliberate, as if measuring each word to avoid the trap Crockett had laid. Crockett, in contrast, grew increasingly assertive, leaning into the argument with a confidence born of preparation and conviction. Finally, the first round of exchanges concluded with the judge calling for a short recess. We will resume after a brief break. Both parties are reminded to adhere to decorum, the judge announced. As the gavel struck, the tension lingered like a charged current in the room. Outside the courtroom, the press buzzed with speculation. Who had the upper hand? Who had landed the more powerful arguments? As the participants exited briefly for the recess, observers noted the subtle dynamics. Ivanka maintained a composed exterior, yet her aides whispered hurriedly. Crockett walked with an air of calm authority, her focus unbroken. It was clear to anyone paying attention that the debate was far from over. The confrontation had only begun, and the courtroom would bear witness to a battle that was as intellectual as it was political, as principled as it was personal. This was the opening clash, a prelude to what promised to be a defining debate of the session, one that would test both the patience and the precision of everyone involved. The courtroom reconvened after a brief recess, but the air was heavier now, charged with anticipation. The murmurs of the gallery faded as the judge signaled for order. Everyone sensed that the next segment would not be a simple exchange of ideas. It would be a battle of strategy, persuasion, and authority. Ivanka Trump rose first, her heels clicking softly against the polished courtroom floor. Her expression was controlled, the perfect image of composure, yet there was a subtle sharpness in her eyes, a sign that she was ready to take control of the room. She began with a carefully measured tone, addressing the judge while casting a glance at Crockett. Your Honor, she began, while I respect the arguments presented, it is important that discussions remain focused and concise. Repetition of the same points does not contribute to clarity. Therefore, I request that Congresswoman Crockett be asked to limit her remarks to avoid redundancy. A ripple of surprise ran through the courtroom. It was a calculated move, a subtle attempt to silence Crockett without directly confronting her. Many observers leaned forward, sensing the tension rising. It was a maneuver, designed to test not only the patience of the judge, but also the resilience of Crockett. Crockett, however, did not flinch. Her posture remained upright, her eyes locked on Ivanka as if silently daring her to press further. She waited a heartbeat before responding, allowing the weight of Ivanka's attempt to settle fully into the room. Then, with calm precision, she spoke, her voice resonant and unwavering. "Your Honor," Crockett said, "with all due respect, limiting discourse in this forum undermines the purpose of accountability. We are not here to repeat points for the sake of volume. We are here to ensure that every aspect of leadership decisions is scrutinized thoroughly. If brevity is demanded at the expense of substance, then the people lose insight into the very issues that affect their lives." The courtroom fell into a hush. Even the reporters paused, pens hovering over notebooks. Crockett's response was both elegant and forceful, a masterclass in turning an attempted silencing into an assertion of authority. Ivanka's eyes narrowed slightly, the first visible crack in her composed exterior, but she quickly regained her posture, leaning on the formality of the proceedings to mask any frustration. "I do not seek to undermine the discourse," Ivanka replied, her voice calm but carrying a subtle edge. "But order and efficiency are critical in these proceedings. Endless reiteration dilutes the effectiveness of the conversation. There is a responsibility to communicate in a manner that is concise and orderly." Crockett's rebuttal was immediate, sharp, and deliberate. "Order and efficiency are meaningless if they come at the expense of truth. Ms. Trump, clarity without transparency is merely a performance. Real accountability demands thorough examination, not curated brevity designed to obscure uncomfortable realities." At this point, the tension in the room was almost tangible. Ivanka had attempted to assert control, to silence her opponent, but Crockett had flipped the moment into a demonstration of authority and poise. The spectators were spellbound. Every pause, every inflection, every subtle glance carried weight. Ivanka took a moment before responding, choosing her words with surgical precision. "Congresswoman, while your commitment to scrutiny is admirable, there is a fine line between scrutiny and disruption. Disruption does not enlighten, it obstructs. The proceedings must maintain focus on actionable solutions, not prolonged critique that risks obfuscation." Crockett's lips curled slightly, not in anger, but in the faintest hint of knowing defiance. She leaned forward, her hands lightly resting on the table, eyes never leaving Ivanka. "Obstruction, Ms. Trump, is what occurs when concerns are dismissed under the guise of efficiency. Actionable solutions cannot exist in a vacuum. They require understanding, context, and accountability, elements that are meaningless if criticism is prematurely stifled." The exchange escalated as reporters scribbled furiously, aware that this was not a typical courtroom encounter. This was a battle of rhetoric and principle, with each participant attempting to assert dominance while remaining within the bounds of decorum. Ivanka, now visibly aware of the challenge, chose a different tactic, one that combined subtle intimidation with authority. "Congresswoman," Ivanka said, leaning slightly forward, "your passion is noted, but it is possible for passion to cloud judgment. I urge the court to consider whether the focus should remain on constructive dialogue rather than extended critique that may hinder progress." Crockett's response was immediate, sharp, and unwavering, delivered with the kind of precision that left no room for misinterpretation. "Ms. Trump, passion does not cloud judgment, it illuminates it. The issues we are discussing affect millions of Americans, and it is a dereliction of duty to prioritize comfort over accountability. Constructive dialogue is meaningless if inconvenient truths are suppressed. The public deserves unvarnished examination of leadership, not a sanitized performance." At this point, The courtroom seemed to hold its breath. Ivanka, for the first time, experienced a subtle but undeniable challenge to her authority in a public forum. Her attempts to assert control had not only failed, but had elevated Crockett's stature in the room. Observers whispered to each other, noting the rare sight of a seasoned public figure being so directly confronted in such a formal setting. The judge, sensing the rising intensity, intervened briefly. Both parties are reminded to focus on the issues before the court and maintain decorum. The proceedings are to continue in an orderly fashion. The judge intoned, striking the gavel lightly. Even after the intervention, the tension did not dissipate. Ivanka chose to pivot, attempting a more strategic argument, appealing to procedural norms and emphasizing her record in public service and advocacy. Your Honor, my record demonstrates commitment, results, and leadership across multiple initiatives. While critique is natural, it is imperative to recognize accomplishments alongside challenges. This balance is necessary to maintain credibility and perspective. Crockett, however, refused to yield any ground. Accomplishments are important, Ms. Trump, she said firmly, but they do not negate failures. Leadership is measured not by selective successes, but by the overall impact of decisions on the communities served. Oversight is not an attack. It is the essence of accountability. The courtroom is not a stage for curated narratives. It is a place for truth. The exchange reached its peak when Ivanka, attempting one last maneuver to regain control, tried to interrupt Crockett mid-sentence. It was a subtle move, almost imperceptible, yet it drew immediate attention. Crockett's gaze snapped to her, unwavering and sharp. Without raising her voice, she let the silence linger for a heartbeat just long enough for the room to feel the weight of her authority, and then continued seamlessly, ignoring the attempted interruption. The courtroom erupted not in noise, but in the quiet recognition of a moment of triumph. Crockett had turned the attempted silencing into a demonstration of composure, resilience, and undeniable command of the discourse. Ivanka's expression, while carefully neutral, betrayed a flash of frustration, a recognition that in this courtroom authority was being challenged not by spectacle, but by substance. As the session neared its end for the day, the judge called for a brief adjournment, signaling that the next phase of debate would focus on evidence, policy specifics, and the tangible impact of decisions. Both women returned to their seats, Ivanka with measured composure, Crockett with quiet confidence. The gallery buzzed with anticipation. Everyone knew that the next round would be the ultimate test of influence, strategy, and persuasive skill. This second part had cemented a critical dynamic. Ivanka's attempts to dominate the discussion had been deftly countered, and Crockett had demonstrated that accountability and composure could overcome even the most calculated efforts to silence her. The stage was set for the final act, a showdown where strategy, evidence, and rhetorical skill would determine who held sway in the eyes of the courtroom, and perhaps the nation watching. The courtroom was tense, the air thick with anticipation as both sides prepared for the final act. This was the moment everyone had been waiting for, the culmination of hours of argument, strategy, and tension. Spectators, journalists, and legal aides alike could feel the electricity in the room, an unspoken understanding that what transpired here would be remembered, not for theatrics, but for the clash of authority, intellect, and principle. Jasmine Crockett rose first, her presence commanding attention without effort. She began with a calm, deliberate cadence, drawing the courtroom into her orbit. Your Honor, today we have examined not merely policies or statements, but the very principles upon which public accountability rests. Leadership is not defined by titles or influence, but by the tangible impact of decisions on the people served. It is incumbent upon those in positions of power to answer for both successes and failures, transparently and without deflection. Ivanka Trump listened intently, her expression measured but her eyes keen, as if studying every nuance of Crockett's delivery. She knew this final segment required precision. The attempt to dominate earlier exchanges had failed. Now the focus had to be on presenting evidence, articulating strategic rationale, and reinforcing credibility. She rose with impeccable posture, voice steady, every word calculated. "Your Honor," Ivanka began, "while I appreciate Congresswoman Crockett's commitment to scrutiny, it is equally important to recognize that leadership decisions are multifaceted. Outcomes are influenced by a complex interplay of economic, social, and political factors. My record demonstrates consistent efforts to empower communities, create opportunity, and implement solutions that reflect both compassion and practicality. Oversight is essential, but it must be balanced with context and understanding." Crockett responded immediately, her tone unwavering. "Context is not a shield for negligence, Ms. Trump. When decisions adversely affect communities, particularly those already marginalized, intent does not absolve responsibility. The public demands accountability not for performances, but for tangible outcomes. The evidence before this court demonstrates areas where promises did not translate into measurable support or improvement, and those failures must be acknowledged honestly." Ivanka's aides handed her a stack of documents, and she lifted them with deliberate care, presenting graphs, reports, and testimonials intended to substantiate her claims. She gestured toward the courtroom's projection screen. "Your Honor, these documents provide objective data showing the positive impact of my initiatives. Economic indicators, employment statistics, and community support programs all demonstrate measurable results. While imperfections exist, they do not negate the overall progress achieved under my leadership." Crockett, however, was ready. She leaned slightly forward, her gaze piercing, voice unwavering as she countered. "Numbers can be presented selectively. True accountability examines both the successes and the shortcomings. These reports, while highlighting some positive outcomes, do not address disproportionate negative impacts on vulnerable populations. Transparency requires confronting the full spectrum of results, not merely showcasing favorable statistics. Leadership is measured by its ability to respond to shortcomings, not by its ability to curate narrative." The courtroom was electric. Every word from Crockett seemed to deepen her command over the room, each argument a precise blade cutting through layers of obfuscation. Ivanka, maintaining composure, responded with strategic clarity, citing case studies and testimonials to reinforce her initiative's tangible benefits. Yet, the subtle tension in her tone betrayed the pressure. It was relentless, unyielding, and masterful in turning every statement into a call for accountability. At one point, Ivanka attempted a conciliatory tone, appealing to the shared goal of societal betterment. "Congresswoman, surely we can agree that our ultimate objective is to improve communities and uplift citizens. Differences in method do not equate to malfeasance. Collaboration and dialogue are essential, and I welcome constructive input that strengthens outcomes." Crockett's eyes held steady, and her response was decisive. "Collaboration is vital, Ms. Trump, but it must not be used as a veil to deflect scrutiny. The public deserves clarity, truth, and results. Constructive input is meaningless if it is dismissed or minimized. Leadership is not validated by appearances. It is validated by real-world impact and accountability." For several tense moments, the courtroom was silent, save for the soft rustling of papers and the occasional scribble of a reporter's pen. Then, Ivanka made a strategic pivot, acknowledging points of critique while reinforcing her overall position. "Your Honor, It is true that no initiative is perfect, and areas of improvement always exist. I recognize these challenges and remain committed to refining strategies, enhancing transparency, and working collaboratively to achieve tangible benefits for all communities. The record reflects ongoing effort, adaptation, and measurable results. Crockett, sensing the opportunity to deliver a final, decisive statement, leaned forward, voice resonant, commanding attention. Your Honor, the essence of leadership is not in the defense of reputation, but in the acknowledgement of responsibility. Effort and intention are commendable, but they are insufficient if outcomes do not meet the standard of accountability owed to the public. Today, we have demonstrated that true leadership requires courage to confront failures, transparency to reveal impact, and commitment to justice that transcends personal legacy. A hush fell over the courtroom. Even the judge appeared momentarily absorbed in the weight of Crockett's closing words. Ivanka sat, expression carefully neutral, as the gravity of the argument settled into the room. It was clear that while both had presented strong cases, Crockett's unwavering insistence on accountability and transparency had resonated in a way that transcended the debate itself. The judge's gavel finally came down, signaling the formal conclusion of the session. The court acknowledges the arguments presented. Both sides have demonstrated extensive preparation and commitment to their positions. The proceedings are now adjourned, the judge declared. As the crowd filed out, there was a tangible sense that this debate would be remembered for more than the words exchanged. It was a demonstration of principle, strategy, and rhetorical mastery. Outside the courtroom, reporters speculated on the implications. Social media buzzed with clips of the exchange, and political analysts dissected every nuance. Ivanka had presented experience, authority, and documentation of achievements. Crockett had wielded clarity, composure, and an unrelenting demand for accountability. For Crockett, the debate was a victory not measured in accolades, but in the undeniable assertion of principle over position. For Ivanka, it was a lesson in the limits of authority when confronted with meticulous preparation and moral clarity. The courtroom had witnessed a clash not just of personalities, but of ideals, one emphasizing transparency and accountability, the other emphasizing strategic narrative and results. As the lights dimmed in the emptying room, the final impression was unmistakable. This confrontation had been more than a debate. It had been a masterclass in the dynamics of power, influence, and responsibility, and while the public might debate who had won, the deeper truth was evident. In the arena of accountability, no attempt to silence principled scrutiny could go unchallenged.